All right, I'll get us started. I want us all to talk about the big picture. What are some of the trends you're seeing with your campus and library budget, and how are you collaborating with vendors? Pass it over to you guys.
Yeah. All right, big picture. Sorry, we have someone trying to break in the door. Like, what's going on? It's very distracted. UNCG, state school, urban, regional, minority, majority, social mobility kind of campus. We had enrollment drop this year, largely from transfer students. We get a lot of transfer students from community colleges. And if any of you are reading up, like keeping up with enrollment situations across the country in the United States, maybe other countries too, I'm not sure. Like in the Chronicle of Higher Education, you may know that community colleges have been by far hit the hardest with enrollment in the last year. We've had other numbers that went up, like new first year students and new grad students, but we lost a lot of transfer students, which we rely on. So slight enrollment drop by how well the state government is doing. We've got billions in the bank, like many states do, that we may or may not get spent. But that money doesn't come to us. That's just irrelevant. So we get funded by enrollment. So a slight drop. Big picture though, lately we have been covering collections well, protecting collections, because we have open positions. Open position money was one of the things we gave up. Administrations maybe feel later on, but just not salary money that wasn't on salary, as well as operational cuts. So we weathered years. If this keeps going, at some point we'll have to cut collections again. But big picture is we're doing okay. Me on this topic. Over to Sarah.
Yeah, so we at Penn State, so I am located at sort of the central campus of Penn State at the University Park campus. We did see our enrollment drop during COVID, of course, like just about everybody did. And we did see a fairly large budget cut across the board at the university, which did, apply to the library. We had our, fair share of budget cuts. Like Steve was saying, we weathered that in part by not filling some of our open positions. We also did have to cut a number of databases. So I'm in the business library specifically, and we actually had to cut ABI Inform was our biggest cut. We were able to hold on to a lot of our resources by giving back some of the money that was allocated to us to purchase monographs in business. That is definitely something we can do that not every discipline can do. So that was part of how we weathered that, but we're, like a lot of places trying to hold on to everything we can as tightly as we can. Summer?
In an attempt not to be too repetitive, I'm just going to talk about how this relates to the business resources budget at Wake Forest. So we are in a unique and also fortunate situation, which is kind of funny to say because we have some funds for business resources at the moment because of early cuts early on in the pandemic. Just because of bad timing, our resources, a few of them were up for renewal right when lockdown hit, so they got chopped, one of them being Euromonitor Passport. But our great collections people, they were saying, hey, when the budget, if it ever gets back to normal, you have that money to spend to either repurchase Euromonitor or do what you need. And that turned out to be a blessing in disguise because, the world's changed a lot in this year and a half, and the business world itself is changing. Our students' needs are changing. So instead of repurchasing Euromonitor, we were able to buy like some add-ons for Mintel about e-commerce because, I don't think we could even have imagined our dependency on e-commerce after the pandemic. And we also bought an add-on for Mintel for cannabis. And we wouldn't have known a year ago that Virginia legalized marijuana. And again, I'm from North Carolina, so that's pertinent to our area. We also did some add-ons for Simmons about digital life, users' digital life. So it turned out to really work in our favor. So that's kind of the big picture where we're at right now.
I'll just
okay, so now we're going to turn to a discussion about
Not your turn.
Oh, it's not my name.
No, that's okay. What I was just going to say, Sarah, is that a lot of the issues about our budget and where things were are actually in my video. But like everyone else, we're dealing with cuts. Some were easier than others, but no one had a budget that was normal, I think, during the last year. That's starting to change, but it's still, I think that we're all kind of behind the 8 ball right now.
So let me add real quick before your next topic. Now we're getting into some more well, maybe a little opinionated pieces and situations where you might have some feedback as well. So we do encourage you with chat or face-to-face now as we get past just the introduction. And here's the campus situation. If you have thoughts and feedback and other alternative ideas or different ideas, please share. Thank you.
No, absolutely, and don't apologize. So we're now going to turn to talking about user expectations as well as license, especially around licensing and access. Summer, did you want to kick us off?
All right, so we have been currently working with our one specific vendor for Capital IQ, S&P Capital IQ we learned through this experience that we really need to work with vendors to eliminate the requirement for use of VPN to access resources off campus. We only have a few, at least business related resources that require this, but it's just an added barrier. And I think we will all echo this sentiment. Our users now not only want, but expect the option for remote access, and they want it to be easy. This has also been seen through, before the pandemic, we were able to secure a all campus subscription to the Wall Street Journal, where our users, our students, faculty, and staff can access the Wall Street Journal, through their app or right directly through their website. This is, and I completely understand this and also agree, like the preferred usage model to access a newspaper. So of course, now that our users are used to this option, they want the New York Times this way. We did just get this subscription, but I think that just reflects like how we are paying more for a lot of these materials because users want to access it a certain way. We already have the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, like a few other ways. I'm sure we all know what I'm talking about here. And another example of this in the business world is my colleague and I were trying to get a subscription to the business journals. Before the pandemic, we just had, the physical copy of this. We paused that, because of COVID, we weren't getting a lot of our physical newspapers in. And now, this has always been a top request to, can we get this article through the Charlotte Business Journal? We're like, well, we don't have that online, but you have to pay more for less with this. The use per person is extremely high and their academic models like basically don't exist. So, but that's what the users want. So, struggling with paying for this and rationalizing it, but also getting the users what they want. And are you next, Steve? Yes. I'll let Steve take it away.
All right. Well, in terms of online access, during the pandemic, we already had plenty of DE programs. So this was not resources, largely at schools that are super residential who didn't have Zoom accounts, and they were learning how to do Zoom in that week we had off in March 2000. They do Zoom, and then suddenly, switching that when we had Zoom and Onetime. I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying we have a lot of online programs, and so we were ready for it in some ways. There were certainly faculty who had not taught online, and they had to get up to speed. And yes, that's a significant experience in a challenging situation. I'm trying to make fun of that. That's truly a big deal. But a lot of faculty who were teaching online anyway. I teach a 3-credit class in the spring and had to go online to finish it. And then I taught it online only, synchronously this spring, and I had more students sign up for it than usual because they were able to take it from home, from work, etc. So that was a good experience. Just regarding like expectations though, I had an interesting, surprising kind of conflict. And we may get into this later, but we used one-time money actually to get some business social science content. Usually one-time money, I think of ebook packages and journal back files like JSTOR new modules and packages, and like humanities, primary source materials, which is all wonderful and useful. But we actually got some businessy, social sciencey, kind of data center things. And I announced to the business school that we got eMarketer through a 5-year deal using one-time money and Sage Business Cases. We purchased that. And the dean of the business school, who usually I'm quite rather close to and supportive of me, and of course I try to support him too, didn't like that. He said we had other databases on our list of things we wanted to get. And I'm pretty sure, because I know some examples, like he's talking about databases to support faculty recruitment, largely high-end finance databases, often with very restrictive user limits. And those of you know about WORDS, WRDS, Word Research Data Services, that's one example, of content that's really limited in excess and also very expensive, and so very high cost per use, and often funded by the business school and the library. Anyway, I was going to ask the dean to write a letter for me for my promotional efforts, and decided I better not do that because it seems like kind of inventing me right now, and I got other pressures to do it. And I kind of like, well, but just, in some ways it's concerning to me, because again, from our provost and chancellor, and the library is expected, and as we should, right, to promote. And recruitment's kind of hard, I think, for the library to do. That's not really something libraries are good at, or we're just not positioned for. But retention to supporting student success, yeah, that's our bread and butter, among other things. Not buying content just to hire the next hot professor who then gets a lot of publications, and contributes to faculty prestige. So I need to work on that a bit with the business school. So that's one example of user expectations I've been dealing with lately that I didn't really expect. All right, over to Sarah.
Yeah, so sort of related to that, Bo, so sort of off in my own little world a little bit. So I am the entrepreneurship liaison for my campus. So at my institution at Penn State, our entrepreneurship programs are almost entirely practitioner focused. So we do have faculty that are doing entrepreneurship research. Their research is generally well covered by our general business databases, our general access to business, to things like Business Source Premier, that sort of thing. So a lot of my focus ends up being on what practitioners need. So what both the faculty who are teaching practice-based classes, so classes where students are focused on writing a business plan, and that's the semester, as well as our student population, our community entrepreneur population. We have a large outreach effort around entrepreneurship on my campus. So while I do have some focus on making sure that we have the materials, the faculty especially, but also some students are doing on scholarly research around entrepreneurship, most of my focus does tend to land on the practice-based issues, which has been really interesting in the current environment we're in. So like my colleagues here, we had one-time money as well. Under our budget rules, we're not allowed to spend one-time money on multi-year deals on anything that's going to require maintenance to a degree. So our one-time money ended up going into things like we purchased EBSCO's back archives of Fortune, and I can't remember what the other two, I think Business Week and one other business magazine, which is really great. It tends not to be what my population needs. And then to add to that, I also have sort of not a unique challenge, but it's more amplified for the population I work with, which is dealing with user expectations around when and how they can use a lot of our commercial databases. So things like eMarketer, Mintel, that have restrictions on being able to use things for practical purposes when they're going out and starting their own business, which again isn't as much of an issue. It's certainly an issue for everybody who does business librarianship, but it's a huge issue when your user population is mostly focused on starting a business or creating a product to then go and sell. So that's made that's made things interesting, especially again over the last year when our budget has been changing and having different priorities as well.
All right, thank you, Sarah. So next topic, emerging content areas. What kind of new content types, topics, data sets are people asking for, whether it's COVID pandemic related or just the newest trend in resources that we're getting asked to look at as social science and business librarians? Summer, you want to go first?
We've been getting quite a few requests actually from faculty and students about ESG data.
That's what that stands for.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, what does that stand for?
Environmental, social governance.
Yes, environmental social governance data ratings. For us at Wake Forest right now, that the data we have related to ESGs is in Bloomberg. For many of us, we know that the access to Bloomberg is complicated. You typically have to access it through a physical terminal. We at Wake Forest do not have remote access to Bloomberg. So this can become kind of challenging to get the data. But I think now this is going to add a little bit of pressure to vendors. We're going to start seeing a lot more packages or bundles or content offerings about ESGs from these different databases. S&P Capital IQ has ESG data. We haven't bought that add-on yet, but what's really frustrating and complicated is the ESG ratings differ from vendor to vendor. Even though they've been around for a while, there's no unification. So it's not only hard to understand as a librarian, it's hard to, tell to faculty and students, help them find what they want. Also, if we get one of these add-ons topic next year, so it's just a little bit complicated to navigate. Also, we've been getting a lot of requests for digital marketing data and just like how folks are behaving online, measuring that. And I'll pass it off to you, Sarah. Yeah,
Sarah.
next.
So if you saw the look of panic in my eyes, it's because I really don't have much to add on this topic beyond what Summer has said. So no, it's fine. No, it's totally fine. What comes through most for us was what you were just talking about at the end there. We have a lot of interest in data about what consumers are doing, what consumer trends there are, what consumer attitudes there are. One challenge that I tend to run across fairly often is my students want the most up-to-date information possible, which is a huge challenge because that can be really, really hard to obtain as an academic customer, at least not for, hundreds of thousands of dollars, which we do not have to spend on that. So Steve?
It's similar. We do now have, for example, illustrating the importance of data, we have both a data librarian position and also data visualization librarian position, as well as, a business librarian and social science librarian, et cetera. So that certainly is a high growth area. It used to be streaming video was, the hot new thing, and it's still vital and important, and there's still developments there, of course. And our budget was being stretched to include streaming videos, was everything else we used to do. And now data visualization, including GIS applications. I mean, we have a geography department, we have ArcGIS, but in terms of widespread access in a web interface, Policy Map, Social Explorer, Simply Analytics, we had to struggle to refund. That may or may not come up later today, we'll see. So data definitely is a big one, ESG is. And yes, these tend to be expensive. Someone in chat, Heidi mentioned Mergent also has ESG reports, which I've looked at and would be interesting to have as well. It's kind of a Wild West category though, isn't it? Because how do you define ESG? How do you measure it, quantify it? Do you go beyond public companies at all? Is it different for the Europeans and Canadians who have different reporting content versus what we have to report for our public companies through the Security Exchange Commission, the SEC? So that is certainly an emerging area, not to mention cannabis, which Summer mentioned already, so we won't go back into that. So yeah, those are some hot topics for us as well.
It's not legal in Pennsylvania.
I was thinking we could talk more about one-time money. I know Steve and Sarah already mentioned this a little bit. So like, can you go into more detail about how you're using your one-time money if you haven't already? Are you, purchasing or sharing interdisciplinary products? And are you alternative forms of funding?
All right. Yeah, I mentioned this briefly, and I can go into some details. We have not had budget increases for collections in a long time. And as you know, inflation rates have to be covered first before you then can add anything new, if you can add anything new. So, being more efficient with our collections. So the question is, how can we get anything new, given that there's, as we just discussed, demands for new content, new products. And I don't want to repeat myself too much, but we did have a lot of one-time money. We usually get that from the provost's office, usually in May. We have a July through June fiscal year, like many of you do. And money gets dumped into us, and then we have to spend it very quickly. And they know that since we have the collections opportunity, not just staffing budgeting in our department as being one of the academic units, we can do that. We can spend money on stuff too, besides the ebooks and journal packages and maybe some primary sources. So I was happy, and I'll name names here because it's good stories. Sage was able to sell Data Planet with a third deal, and eMarketer I mentioned. And that's a small shop, but they were agreeable, and we did a 5-year deal with them, and purchasing Sage business cases as well. Examples. And I looked at some other possibilities too, and some vendors just don't provide the option or weren't willing to pursue a 5-year deal for us, or any kind of deal, 3-year deal as well. And the question there is though, okay, 4 years from now, because we've had Sage Data Planet for 2 years, I think, it's going to run out. And will we have money, and what year would that be? 2025 to renew Data Planet if we have a core user, a population on campus who use it, it's in the syllabus, it's in Canvas, faculty and students know about it, particularly the faculty who are assigning students to use it again. Will we be able to renew it, or do we have to cancel it or just let it expire, I should say, because it's run out? eMarketer, the same thing. But I don't care that much about what's going to happen 5 years from now. Who knows what collections are going to be, what situation, even what content areas are hot or not. So it was something that we'll try. And maybe it's sort of like a data-driven acquisitions thing. If eMarketer's usage remains strong for 5 years, then maybe I need to cancel something else we've had for 20 years to retain and keep paying for eMarketer because usage is there. Like with Data Planet, and say the business case is repurchase, so that's not an issue. So Data Planet, if usage is low, or look at data and say, no, this isn't worth keeping, so we're not going to pay for this again, because people rather use your monitor for data needs, at least international market data. So I think of it as simply a DDA, there's some acronyms for us, right? PDA, DDA, data-driven acquisitions sort of product or arrangement for what normally is a annual subscription product. So I think that is an okay way to handle that. The other one more quick thing about, if you can spend one-time money, usually the inflation rates are built in. That is, that's what you get in terms of giving them a big check for 5-year content. At least you get locked in inflation rates. So we don't have to worry about paying more for eMarketer year on year and not knowing what those rates will be, because we prepaid, in effect, that in the single check we sent them. So that's the nice thing about the publishers that are flexible regarding one-time money. But I know that's exceptional, and I may not be able to do that again if we get one-time money this spring. We'll see. So that might have been a one-time, once in a lifetime kind of thing to do.
Yeah, so as I alluded to in one of my previous responses, we're not allowed to spend one-time money that way. And that it can be both a good and a bad thing. So at my previous institution, we were allowed to do that. And so we were able to get some pretty good, cool things with pretty good deals. Not allowed to do that where I am now. And so it does eliminate that risk of when our current contract is up, not being able to do that again. But as Steve mentioned, things do change so fast. So that's not always, the biggest concern for right now. One of the experiences I had, switching gears a little bit though, over the past year and a half, almost 2 years, and going through the process of looking at our budget when we had to make those cuts, was there were a couple resources, in particular, Simply Analytics, that other librarians sort of questioned as something that we needed to hold on to, given that those resources are things that aren't seen as being used by the wide population of the university. And so I found myself in a position where something like Simply Analytics is really, really essential to the student population and the faculty population that I work with. And I was able to sort of, I don't want to say talk people off of that, but like I was able to explain to my colleagues why it was something that I felt was essential to hold on to. And a lot of that comes down to it being an interdisciplinary resource. So yes, it's probably primarily used by entrepreneurship students, by students in marketing, looking at those types of topics. But right now I'm working with a journalism class that is utilizing Simply Analytics for a semester-long community reporting assignment, which has been really, really interesting. They're using that product, which if you're unfamiliar, is a mapping tool that allows you to map demographic, consumer behavior, economic data along with business locations. They're able to use that mapping tool to visualize some of the characteristics of the community that they're reporting on, which is a small city about an hour away from us. And it's been really great to, have an extra example in my back pocket of how a resource like that can be used beyond sort of the business school and the entrepreneurship programs. It also helps that our entrepreneurship minor at Penn State is extremely interdisciplinary. So I end up with a lot of examples of that built in just over the course of my regular work.
Can I add something to that real quick?
Yes.
And then maybe after that, we'll go to Corey's video. We do a really good question in chat that we'll bring up
I
after Corey's
I
video.
didn't answer this one.
Okay, you can run too. We did actually, well, we'll get to it. We had actually, Corey and I think Corey, were you there? Had a Charleston conference about non-counter products. Just 6 minutes. I wanted to add data. Simply Analytics is an interesting example, at least for the data side of it, in terms of the challenge, and I think also the opportunity of making decisions. So, typically you get an offer a product and you say, do you want to subscribe to it? Yes or no? Yeah, here you go. Maybe simultaneous user limits or not, but that's rare to get that. But Simply Analytics, is a data set package. So you choose what data sets you want. There's the base database, which has the default price, and then you can add in other stuff. And there's like, I didn't forget how many, 15 different products you could add in if you wanted it. And you have to examine the descriptions of those things and compare it to the needs in your campus. So you have to choose your data sets, and each time you choose one, you add the cost to your total cost. And then you also have a matrix of concurrent users. We had 20 concurrent users when NC Live funded this statewide North Carolina public and academic libraries, and they dropped it or didn't renew it. And so we had to buy it ourselves which we had once done a long time ago. And we had NC Live, which was easy, you rarely had any issues, but we had to start over, and we only fund 3 because it's expensive to fund 20. Just one quick note that if you're doing a class, they will give you like 50 seats for that day. And they're always eager to give you that option, which is great. But picking price, you get your price points, right? But you have also the matrix of users and then the data sets. So it's a complex decision-making process for data librarians and business librarians and anyone else who has to sort of go through this process of deciding what to get.
Also, as a note, we only fund 5 and we're a huge university, but it's worked for us.
Right, shall we switch to Corey?
Sure.
And then after that, we're going to have a general Q&A, including Bruce's question and any other questions from either online or physical. Okay. Sarah, I think you need to show the video, right?
Okay. This is our budget picture. We were just talking about how things are actually shaped up. You can see that is not the picture of growth. And so it really was sucky even before the pandemic started, and then it just got worse. So the weird economy of COVID-19, when we started out, there was less students and less revenue. Grad students were down 10%, and a lot of our revenue comes from that. Tons of deferred maintenance. There's more spending on tech, PPE, cleaning, and early in the pandemic, that's all we saw. Then on the good news, we had less expenses overall. Travel expenses were way down, hosting for food, way down. Hiring freezes and no salary increases saved a ton of money. And vacancy savings from frozen positions were huge. So in many ways at Ross, the decreases were greater than the savings were greater than the added costs. What you'll see here is a picture of just sort of how we were looking. We were very increased in the number of teams that we supported, except in fiscal year 21, because there were fewer students, especially graduate students on campus. So a lot of what we wanted to do was focus on right-sizing resources. Large universities have capacity to use everything that's offered, Raghunathan's second law, every reader his or her book, but no library can afford and should try to purchase everything. And so we needed to be good stewards of the university money. And I just received an email from, we have an account, personal account from SiriusXM, and here's Seth Rudetsky and Christine Petting. They are adding, the price is going up, but they're adding 11 new channels, including boy bands of the 90s and 2000s. So there are 11 new channels that I will never, ever, ever listen to. And we see this over and over again. So what I wanted to do was actually talk about how we right-sized the resources. There's a strong benefit to long-term deals. I love the deal that eMarketer at UNCG, I think that's fantastic. Long-term deals provide stability to both sides. Vendor has reliable income, library has reliable expenses, and there's also goodwill that's earned between the two. So what I want to do very quickly is talk about 4 different cases on how we actually manage this. First one is I'm going to call slice and dice. 2 vendors work with us, looked at our content and usage to make better decisions. Bruce Pensek had a great question about non-counter data. And you get data and all the usage data all looks really weird, but you can almost always use that data to figure out if there are segments that you can walk away from. In the slice and dice scenario, we were able to actually walk away from elements that were not used as often, and it helped save our budget. Flat is something that's really great. If they'll let you go flat for renewals, and especially for multiple years, it helps lessen the number of resources that we need to cut just to stay afloat. And some vendors actually work with us on existing licenses. Flat and added content. One vendor in particular offered us a new 3-year flat deal and added content that was useful. So that's something like serious without the $1 extra a month. We have a very good long-term relationship with this vendor, and they were also looking at the big picture. And then case 4 is the bad one. It's the NMP, not my problem. Few vendors shrug their shoulders and are like, well, you have a license, or very concerned about what is going on with their own budget, not with the sort of the short-term view, not the long-term view. One vendor had us basically take some items off the books, but didn't give us a real benefit for that thing we did for them. And so one vendor really was one that I just didn't have much interest in, and it was a very, very difficult renewal. And it kept coming back to, well, this is as good as we got. And we had very successful negotiations with a lot of vendors. One, we didn't do so well. So like a cat in a puzzle, there are pieces everywhere, and we're trying to figure things out with the added complications that come from there. So the video is available on the site, but I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing right now. I hope that worked. It's the joy of, thanks, Sarah. I'm going to go ahead. I talked very quickly but so that we could get to the questions. And if you want, you can bore yourself and watch the video later. So I'm going to go mute. Thank you.
Good job. Well, it's 1 o'clock, and according to the booklet, we're done. According to Pathable, we have a few more minutes to go. So if you want to slip out or log off, please go ahead and do that. Thank you for being here. But otherwise, why don't we, if we can, use this time for Q&A and discussion and other ideas, alternative ideas, pushback, whatever you happen to have to say. And we'll keep monitoring chat and also invite the people here live to speak up if they have something they want to add or say or ask questions about. Does that sound good?
Mhm.
And Bruce, did we cover did Corey specifically address your question well? I could have my own take on it. Question is non-counter data, weird business data, social science content, don't have counter stats. Someday that may happen, but it hasn't happened yet. I actually 2 years ago, was it 2 years or 3 years ago, I was working with Cynthia Cronin from Wharton School Business Library on a program, and we had 3 vendors with us talking about how hard it is to use counter compliant data. Something Analytics was one speaker, Privco, and S&P, Standard & Poor's. And in the audience was the head of Counter, and she stood up, and it was great to hear her saying, "Oh, well, actually, next time the new Counter version is going to come out in 2 months, and it's going to work for you guys." And I'm like, "Great, thank you." And I don't think that happened, and I'm not blaming her because how do you quantify a GIS search with downloading or accessing articles or book chapters? It's just a very different thing, right? In our case, just quick it's a user click through with an hour downloading 1,000 articles and use them, or you gave after 1 minute, it doesn't matter. That's the same data point, same usage, but at least it cost per use analysis for most of them. And then yes, pull in other judgments like, well, this database is weird. You really can't look at cost per use, or this is required for accreditation. You can't cut it unless something weird, something like that. Anyway, so, we do quibble about the data. We have to, but that is one way for us to have data for everything, including data analytics and other strange products.
I could jump in, Steve. Okay, so I like to call my personal approach to assessing the use of those types of databases that aren't counter compliant, that don't have hard data, and this is probably going to make some people cry. I call it just vibes, no data. So, for example, I was talking about how I felt strongly that we needed to hold on to Simply Analytics. We did have some data that we got from the vendor about who had been accessing it, that kind of thing. But my personal mode of advocating for it was I talked about, how many classes I had used in, how well it was received by the faculty I work with. The thing about Simply Analytics specifically is every single time I teach in a class, I end up getting at least 2 more faculty members on board with it, because the faculty I teach it for goes and tells their colleagues, and then they contact me. So I get at least 2 more faculty every single time I teach it. And the amount of praise it gets, everybody loves it. So even though I don't have hard numbers to back that up, and I do have some, I can say, well, I had this many faculty contact me about it. I've had 2 instruction sessions this semester that were not originally planned. And when I first reached out to my faculty about instruction sessions, but when I presented at my campus's Entrepreneurship Educators Gathering on it, I had multiple professors ask me to come and teach their students about it, including the community journalism class I have been working with. So yeah, so even though it's not, necessarily hard data, I know that the subject areas and the academic programs that I'm the liaison to are using it and really like it, which again makes me more likely as the subject liaison to go to bat for it next time someone is like, well, do we really need Simply Analytics? Isn't it exactly the same thing as Policy Map? It's not.
I think we're caught up on there's some discussion from Bruce about vibes. That's good. Any insights or predictions from the audience here? And we will repeat it so people online can hear. Yes, please.
I just had a question. So I'm Meredith Wilson. I'm the head of scholarly resources for Boston University. This presentation, thank you guys so much. Just kind of wanted to ask you all and the folks in the room as well, what are your strategies going forward for negotiating with business vendors for whom libraries, we're not their primary vertical, right? That usually is finance firms, you all are business subject specialists, so you know more about this world than I do. But, what do I do when I don't have a leg to stand on with folks like, let's just say it, Bloomberg, right? We all know who I mean. So, what are we going to do? And do you see yourself pushing your consortia that you may be members of to sort of move into like the consortial licensing space with business vendors? Have you had success with the deals? I think someone mentioned, keeping costs more flat that way, et cetera. How are we going to do this with the coalition of the enrollment crisis, which is here and is going to intensify over the next 5 years, and the fact that our budgets have been flat pre-pandemic, cut during pandemic, and we know that business resources rise on average of 5 to 7%. Please solve this.
All right, thank you. And let me try to rephrase that or paraphrase that. Please jump in if I miss some of that. So what negotiation strategies would we suggest, particularly for business content, given that, as you all know, libraries are usually not the primary customer base, the primary market. The primary market is corporate and governmental sometimes, and nonprofits and libraries in the mix. Given that for many of us, enrollment will continue to be an issue, and that the business people can be picky to work with sometimes, including opportunities for multi-year and or summer. One of you want to go first?
No.
I'll add something quick, but then business database negotiator for the Carolina Consortium, which covers both South North Carolina. It's basically all the academic libraries in the 2 states. It's not just UNC system. It's like 150 plus libraries, most of which are really small and don't get into the business deals because, as we know, those are specialized and awful expensive. Not awfully expensive. Did I say that? Often expensive and awfully expensive too. IBIS is one example. I mean, if you know about IBIS, IBIS World, it's a very popular, we've had, Sarah and I talked about this not too long ago, collection of industry reports. Twice I've talked to their office in New York. They've expressed some interest in a consortial idea, and talking to, doesn't matter, I'll skip it. The sales rep, and he was a go-between between me and his boss, who's probably the head of sales for IBIS. And they were debating it internally, he told me, for like 2 months. And I finally called, like, what's your decision? And he said, no, we really don't think it's the best thing for us to do. It's fine, right? That's their choice. I wish it hadn't taken so long to decide that. And then a year later, the same thing came up. We're thinking about this again. And I talked, this is how it works. We are opt-in, it's, it's not like you're selling to the UC system, where often the digital library buys something for the entire system across the state, or CSU likewise. No, we're not that way. It's up anyway, and still they don't want to do it, which is disappointing. And at some point, the libraries that really want IBIS have it, and so they wouldn't necessarily gain new members, right? And if you're a consortial, that's the thing is the 10% off you get going to be compensated by getting new subscribers, and at some point, your subscriptions, your base is already covered. On the other hand, Bloomberg, Words, Content, CompuStat, they don't want to do consortiums at all. It's just not their business model. They may not even have staffing who can handle negotiations for that. I don't try anymore for some of those. A library asked, see, we're looking at this because there's a consortium agreement. I said, we tried that once and they had no interest in it. I know that's not changed. I'm sorry, we just can't support a deal for that. So yeah. Some of them say yes, and some of them do not. The typical to get out analytics, then they're able to do social deal. The companies that permanently sell to Wall Street firms that charge a lot, have very socialized, it doesn't give you much negotiation leverage in that regard. Corey, what can you add to this topic?
Hi. One of the dynamics, thank you for saving me for typing this, is that by getting in front of students, business students, you're actually putting a product like an IBISWorld or like Mergent or Bloomberg in front of the eyes of people who will then venture off into businesses themselves, and you are buying brand recognition essentially, so that when a student is down the road creating a company for her or himself, they may actually think, oh, IBISWorld, I know that. There is a value there. That all being said, vendors have the decision to enter the academic space or not. And, we have a lot of vendors who just aren't interested, and that's fine. I can't convince them or tell them they have to. But what we want to do is we want to promote what are the benefits to them. And I think exposure and a little added revenue are two of the real key benefits for them. So fundamentally, insofar as negotiation, we try to be honest and truthful with the information that we shared with vendors early on in the pandemic. We said, this is where we are looking. This is what our cuts are. This is where we're going, and tried to use that as a way to, use transparency to our advantage. It worked with some, didn't work with others. And, that's where we are. We signed enough long-term deals that we actually are in pretty good shape for this year, but not perfect.
Very much for that question. Thank you, sir. Sorry. 4 minutes left. Any final comments or questions from online people or people here physically? Any final words from any of the 4 panelists?
We have a good conversation going in the chat about the intersection of Simply Analytics, Policy Map, which, despite the way I said that, I actually do like Policy Map, and it does fit in well. It's just for my primary population. It's it's great. It's not the primary resource that they would want to use, and then social score. So if you haven't been watching that, I highly recommend checking out the side conversation that's been happening.
Thank you, Sarah. Summer or Corey, any last words? Corey?
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say that, one of the things that I often talk about is that the differentiation between faculty and student needs. And the librarians are one of the few areas in the higher ed where we try to balance those out, and it doesn't really work well. You'll have faculty data requests that are very expensive and used once, twice, 3 times. And then you have student resources like an IBISWorld or like an ABI Inform or Mergent that's used hundreds of times a day, maybe dozens of times a day. And so trying to figure out a balance in there can't be done with the numbers. It has to be done with getting back to, I think, the vibes issue that certainly plays into that. And so it's an art, it's not a science.
All right, and with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you, everyone who attended online as well as in person. And we hope you have a good final hour of the conference and good travels home, and stay warm wherever you happen to be. Thank you again.